Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I want to talk about the state of the game for Puzzle and Dragons. So, as a bit of background information, I've been playing Pad for just under 2,500 days, which is an absurdly long time and is actually my most long played game to date, and I don't really see myself stopping anytime soon. And with that in mind, there is obviously an absurd amount of content for players to actually kind of catch up on and play, so to speak, because even though like the first couple of years could probably be condensed and cleared relatively easily, it's still lots of content to actually play through. But at the same time, it definitely can be overwhelming for newer players. But what I want to talk about in this video / article is that in the past few months, we have arguably, in my opinion, been experiencing some of the best times of Pad, and in all honesty, I feel like we're entering or have entered a second golden era or age, because at this point in time there are plenty of things you can do. There are numerous different meaningful ways to spend your stamina, content that is available for all types of players. There are easier content such as, like, say, farming Gung-Ho Collab for pies, or you're playing through Alt Arena 4, or you're playing through ranking dungeons. The point of the matter is there are many different things we can do right now, and it's at least appealing to more people. At the same time, we've also been given an absurd amount of premium currency or magic stones for free, along with just recently 100 free Godfest rolls. In that same breath, I do feel Pad is not a perfect game. There are still gaps that I feel should be addressed, and at the same time, I will be talking about that in this video article. But for the most part, I just want to kind of give a general macro view of how I view the state of the game at this point in time. So another little history lesson. So the first golden age, I like to think, for Pad occurred when Arena 1 was released till, like, say, the very beginning of Coliseum 1. So there's Arena 1, Arena 2, Arena 3, Coliseum 1. And during that time frame, I feel like that was one of the best times to play Pad, relatively speaking, because there was a nice balance between farmable options being strong, as well as rare machine cards. More so, Pantheon cards were actually desirable, not just Godfest exclusive or rare collab cards, which in turn made it so more and more players had access to teams that could tackle endgame content. But at the same time, that end-game content was pretty well balanced, in my opinion. Like, it was tough, it was challenging, but it was also meaningful and beneficial to play through because it had desirable rewards. You could get the killer latents, which were rare at the time. You could also get Orpharian parts, which actually was a wonderfully desirable sub. And also, as well, Mirror was one of the top leaders, was also being farmable. So it just gave players many options to play, and I felt it was just a great time overall. Like, it was quite an engaging time. There was challenging content, and there was definitely a nice balance between the number of mechanics presented in a dungeon and the amount of puzzling matching you had to do. There were some mechanics, and they could be potentially difficult to overcome, but we had at least the right tools to deal with it. But at the same time, it was more so, it wasn't just having specific cards in your box to counter mechanics with direct active skills. It was a lot of puzzling around, matching the correct number of orbs, matching the right number of combos. I remember there were people who kind of theorized Kushinada Hime teams to perfectly plan out the number of combos you had to make for different absorption spawns so you could slide under that threshold. It was quite an interesting time overall, and I feel like that was definitely the first golden era. So with that being said, let's just kind of fast forward after that time frame. So after that first golden era, basically after Coliseum 1 was released, Gung-Ho, I honestly felt, just got kind of comfortable in their success. They're like, we have a great game. We're doing so well. We are incredibly popular. Money rolling in. Let's not release any content for an extensively long time. That was basically what happened after Coliseum 1 was released. There was virtually no ranking dungeons, because I could look between the crowns I had. I'm going back through my older YouTube videos, just trying to figure out what the time frame was for content being released, and I'm pretty sure I got most of the crowns in that time frame, and it barely changed. So there was basically no ranking dungeons, there was no new endgame content to play, there was no relevant farmable monster to actually acquire, there was really nothing to do in Pad. And in all honesty, I feel like a lot of the game slowed down. They probably lost a large chunk of their player base, and it was probably just not a very good time overall if you were an endgame player, because you just really had nothing to do. Like, the gap between Coliseum 1 and Alt Arena 1 was tremendously long, and it just felt frustrating overall. And then at the same time, their Alt Arena 1, I believe, was more so an Arena 4, if I'm not mistaken. I think we just called it Alt Arena 1, I don't recall. But the point of the matter is there's a long content drought, and it was just a sad time overall. But on the bright side, during late 2019 and basically all of 2020, Pad has definitely like put the pedal to the metal, so to speak, because content is now starting to flow in once again, and there's lots of things to do. Because if we just look back at the past 6 months, because it just became July, we have been given an absurd amount of magic stones compared to before. There were like free login giveaways, there were monthly quests, there was just like one-time big magic stone lump sums. There were just lots of ways to get magic stones. We also had new endgame dungeons being released, so there was content to play for the endgame players. We had numerous ranking dungeons, so all players can potentially enjoy that as well. And we also had events that were meaningful to play. But more so the point is we currently have wonderful ways to spend our stamina. For the most part, I think almost every week has at least some sort of event that has a meaningful place to spend stamina instead of just playing the same dungeon over and over again. So as a quick little like possible summary, not necessarily in chronological order, we had Quillen Dragon Invades, we had Gung Ho Pie ticket farming, obviously the ranking dungeons, we had training arenas having boosted rank experience, so motivation to play there to rank up yourself and your monsters. 3 players gaining Super Waking, so 3 player just suddenly became fun to do now, and Dark Illumina along with Ulcerina 4. So I feel like we've had quite a few different exciting ways to spend our stamina, and for myself, at least when Ulcerina 4 first came out, I knew I should have been playing it much more, but there were just other things that were demanding my attention and stamina that I had to kind of play and pursue. And that whole concept of struggling to use up all your stamina, well, not struggling to use your stamina up in beneficial ways was quite exciting, because it kind of made me remember older times, Pad, where it's like I had stuff I wanted to play, but there's never enough stamina or possibly time to do so. There was just always things to do. And as a whole, I feel like that is great for the game. It's showing initiation on Gung Ho's part to give players meaningful ways to spend stamina, because when you really think about it, Pad is really just a player versus environment game with a large undertone of collecting stuff. We don't necessarily have great places to spend our stamina, but with these events, there are fun things to do. And even though not everyone can take advantage of all the different dungeons or events, at least it's a wide spectrum of things. It's not just things for endgame players. It's not just things for new players. It's a nice balance for everything. So as a whole, I do honestly feel like we have entered a second golden era. And another thing that I have noticed, at least when I looked at like the Pad Reddit forums, people were posting like screenshots of like ads of Pad in like Instagram or like the App Store homepage, and it's just a good sign to see like Pad is starting to possibly pick up overall, because we just been given 100 free Super God Festivals. Pad Pass came to North America. There are a lot of good things that make me confident to say that Pad is doing well, at least moving forward. At the same time, no game is perfect, and I feel like Pad has numerous places that can be addressed, but I want to kind of just point out the more glaring issues that are not necessarily just basic quality of life improvements, more macro concepts. And the first concept, which is really probably the problem for all the other effects that I'm going to be talking about, is that there are just too many cards. And it might sound weird because we're like, well, we have thousands of different cards, so much variety, so many things you can do. But the thing is, from those thousands of different cards, only really a handful of those are truly meaningful and valuable. There are tons of junk and filler cards that don't serve any purpose whatsoever, that have been completely outdated and become obsolete. Like, there are many things that just they exist, but they have no reason to exist. And even many Pantheon cards have kind of been pushed down into obscurity. Maybe they'll get evolutions, but oftentimes those evolutions can kind of be a miss, so to speak. And I feel like this giant rolling pool is frustrating because of so many different options, but the bigger issue is when Gung Ho releases a new card, which is almost every week, or a series of new cards, they have to be stronger than previously available options. Otherwise, no one's going to be rolling and pursuing them, because if you think about it, if it's not new and exciting, well, what is the point of actually trying to acquire it? So that does in turn raise the rate of power creep, because if you think about it, every couple of weeks we're getting numerous new cards, and some of them are going to have to be better than previously available options, which in turn makes it so the meta just keeps shifting. And this is usually the biggest case for leaders, because leaders tend to get pushed out fastest overall. And while this does keep the meta fresh, so to speak, because we've got new leaders kind of being cycled on top, it also means players who did acquire something that was strong may find themselves struggling when they try and counter new content, because that leader just won't do the same. Or you may not even be able to find friends to pair with, even though it's a leader that could definitely clear content. Like, for example, in like Altarena 3, which is still a reasonably challenging dungeon, so many different teams can actually clear it. But the way the game works is we only can show 2 or 3 leaders with best friends that you may not even be able to find those pairings you want to have. And that in turn can just feel frustrating because you feel like, well, the boat has already left and I just can't keep up. And this whole concept of too many cards coming out is really going to have a trickle-down effect to my next points. Because the thing is, Gung-Ho likes to release new stuff, and with leaders, it's quite easy. All you technically have to do is just increase the multipliers a little bit, and a card that's very similar to an older card with better multipliers will just automatically become a better leader. So we're always having this constant cycle, and this is going to be possibly one reason why I feel like this point exists of no meaningful ways to improve existing cards. So when Pad first came out, again, another history lesson, getting something to plus 297 and max skilled was a big achievement. Like, I remember Sakuya was my first real leader, and I got her to 297 pretty quick because I was incredibly motivated. But it took an absurd amount of time, but it was a tremendous feeling of accomplishment. Like, when I got my Sakuya to plus 297, I felt so proud of myself because I would be grinding Ocean to Heaven for maybe 2 pluses if I was lucky. And that's an absurd amount of time, but when I did it, it felt great, but Sakuya managed to stick around and be relevant for a prolonged period of time. And I actually used her for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. Like, it was great. Like, I had like a pad love, so to speak, like a main, and it was nice being able to invest and develop and build her up. And over time, pluses and max skill have definitely become much easier. And I don't think I would want to grind Ocean of Heaven again because it was soul-sucking and just tedious overall. But we kind of have lost that whole idea of like investing heavily into a card to kind of bring it up to a new high level that just makes you stand out. Because even though we do have the Altarena 4 Super Latents being released, they are nice, they are strong, but at the same time, the Pad Pass kind of killed the momentum to try and acquire them because at least every month, players can get one of these, and you're not going to be throwing these out willy-nilly. You're going to be investing on certain cards, and ideally, hopefully, using that card for a prolonged period of time, but at the same time, there are only a couple that are truly meaningful, and then you're going to be kind of expected to have those super latents, so it's not really necessarily customization anymore at this point in time. It's just you kind of really need to have a super poison or a poison surge on most teams nowadays because it just makes your life easier. So I feel like we've kind of lost that level of customization because weapon assists do exist, but they do get swapped out all the time, and it's still not that great a degree of customization in my opinion because this is basically tying up to the first point of too many cards being released on too frequent of a basis. Can you imagine if you spent 2 months building up your card, making it so strong, making it powerful, and you're like, I'm finally done, this is great. And then during those 2 months, several new and much better cards have been released, which pseudo-invalidate what you just rolled and spent all that time building up. And I feel like that is probably the main reason why there is no truly meaningful way to invest and develop your cards, because Gung-Ho wants you to keep rolling and keep acquiring the new, stronger thing that has just been released. So I guess it is, in a way, a bit of a blessing that we don't have to spend weeks or months developing the card. Like, so nowadays, I roll a card, I can get it max level, max skilled, max pluses, all the good latents, all the correct awakenings, super awakenings done within the 5 minutes time frame. Like, it's just doesn't feel as special anymore. Like, it's more so like, I got a card, good, it's invested, it's developed, oh good, I'll use it for a little bit, and then I'm going to be like, oh, I got something new, I gotta do that again, and repeat the whole cycle over again. It's basically this recycle of acquiring a new card, instantly maxing it out, using it for a bit, dropping it when something new comes out. That's kind of the cycle of pad. And I feel that is frustrating because I kind of want to almost go back to that whole idea of like, I feel proud, I achieved something. And as a bit of a side note, like, I do play one other mobile game, Fire Emblem Heroes. I've played it for a couple of years. I'm very casual with it. I don't play like competitive, I don't spend on it. I just enjoy it. But one thing I did like about the system was their merging. Basically, you get duplicates of cards, which is a whole new, like, they have a whole different like rolling mechanism system and much less cards overall than pad. But basically, you get duplicates of a card and you can merge them together to make like a plus, up to a plus 10 version. And the idea is with those plus 10 versions, they have better stats. They're just better units overall. And it could take you a long time to grind that up. You could be saving for many months to get enough of their premium currency to roll, or you just acquire them in lower rarities because they're lower rarity tiers, and you can level them up to higher rarities, and then merge them together. The point is, you can have an older Generation 1 card that still is reasonably strong, and like, while they're obviously not as magical as currently newly released cards, they're at least reasonably able to keep up. Like, I have a couple of older Generation 1 cards that I still use, and they're actually doing reasonably well still, just because of this merging system. And I don't know if Pad can definitely incorporate something into that, but it would be nice to be able to actually get a card, invest in it, take some time to actually invest in it, feel accomplished about it, and use it for at least a modest period of time, instead of next couple of weeks something new and busted has come out that you're kind of like, well, maybe I should move on to something else. Point of the matter is, there are no truly meaningful ways to improve our cards to at least use them on a much longer term basis, I feel. In addition to that, I feel like dungeons are definitely becoming far too mechanic heavy, because original Pad was just normal style dungeons. They had a health pool, a defense value, and a single attack. Pretty flat. Then Technicals came out, they had mechanics, and for a while, like I said, like I feel like kind of going up to like Arena 3 and Coliseum 1 was a nice balance between like the right number of mechanics and the matching skills you had to have. You had to basically plan out your active skill usage pretty well, but they were relatively generic actives, mostly just orb changers with a couple like utility ones thrown in. But it was basically just managing your orbs well and dealing burst damage to kill a spawn or stalling as needed. It was a nice balance, so to speak. Nowadays, for the most part, if you don't kill something, they oftentimes just kill you flat outright, which doesn't feel good. And at the same time, damage, like health values of encounters versus the damage output we have are kind of out of whack, so to speak. Before, it was difficult to one-shot something. You always had to either run like more of a glass cannon leader or save up orbs, use actives and orb changers to burst and kill down. Nowadays, the vast majority of high-end teams can sweep the vast majority of floors in a dungeon with no active skill intervention. It's just match explosive amounts of damage. And the challenge now is having all the counters to all the different mechanics in the dungeon. So I feel like a lot of the emphasis has been taken away from the matching aspect to just having the right team and the right counters. And in my opinion, this switch is not as healthy overall, especially when you have to have specific active skills to overcome problems. A couple of those are okay, but it gets incredibly active skill hungry in endgame content. So I'm just copy pasting my Arena 4 checklist, so to speak, and all the things you see in blue are things you have to have an active skill counter for. If you don't have an active skill counter for these, you will not pass the dungeon. Like, I'm pretty confident you will not pass the dungeon if you don't bring these 5 different things of a Fujin style active skill, Awoken Bind removal, time debuff removal unless you're a fixed time leader, attack debuffs, and unable to match orb effects. If you can't bring those, you're not going to win. And that just feels frustrating because a lot of content is kind of gatekeep there. But the fun doesn't stop there. You have all of these other things you need to address, which are basically just mostly awakenings you want to try and cover, or active skills in lieu of the awakenings if you can't cover them. So the point of the matter is, you have 4 subs, 2 leaders with 6 inherits in total. You need to bring all of these counters, all of these resists, all of these specific active skills, have them ready at the right time, because stalling can sometimes be difficult to do so. And that's kind of what team building has definitely become. And I feel like this whole like mechanic heavy dungeons don't feel as fun anymore, in my opinion. It's just more so like, do you have the correct active skill to counter? Cool, you can pass the dungeon. I dislike that personally, but at the same time, I feel like there's no really way helping this at this point in time. We've kind of dug this deep of a hole already. We can't suddenly come out of it. We can't go back to the older Pad of like struggling to deal enough damage to overcome a spawn and having that management of just mostly bringing orb changers to burst things down or just shield and tank things out accordingly. It's now having these specific things. And in addition to this, the last thing that I feel like needs to be addressed is, why don't we know what the enemy's going to do? We enter a dungeon and all we see is we have no information in the dungeon whatsoever. It's just like, here's a spawn. It's going to attack you in 1 turn. Good luck knowing what it's going to do. You will not know unless you look it up on third-party websites or applications. I'm not saying that these are bad things to have. It's just the fact that in-game, you cannot play Pad without having access to these external database resources. It's a silly design. Like, this Pad is advertised as a puzzle game, but what kind of puzzle gives you zero indication of what's going to happen? Oh, look, there's an enemy. What could it do? You have no idea. Like, in an ideal world, dungeon information is much more helpful. We know what percentage of health the enemy's at, what their movesets are, and even just how much health they have. But, like, that may be too much to ask for, like, at least right away. But perhaps, like, a small thing they could do is just tell us what the next attack is going to be at the current health threshold. You don't have to tell me what they're going to do at lower health thresholds. Just tell me what they're going to do next attack. If I can know they're not going to kill me, I could stall. But at the same time, because of the way dungeons are designed, monsters have random skill sets. They have, like, say, 4 different possible moves they could do, and one of those might execute you. So you have to always play for the fact that it's going to execute me. We have to kill. We have to go, go, go. And it just takes kind of that strategy aspect out, in my opinion. Like knowing what's going to happen is a big deal. Like most other strategy-based games I've played, you at least can kind of know what the enemy's behavior is going to be, so you can plan out accordingly. Pad, you can't do that. And I just honestly feel like that's something that has been lacking. Like just knowing that the monster's going to hit me for 80,000 is meaningful if I actually are less than 80,000 health. I could heal up or try and kill or use a damage reduction or something along those lines. Point of the matter is, it doesn't happen. Now, while all of that does sound negative, I still feel like Pad is doing great as a whole. Like, we are definitely kind of entering this second golden age, so to speak. We have so much free premium currency coming our way. We got those 100 Godfest rolls. We have meaningful ways to spend our stamina for players across all experience levels. We have things for beginners, we have things for more advanced players. They're just things to do, and I think that's great as a whole overall. So with that being said, let me know what you think about the direction Pad is going. Do you like the way things are progressing? Do you feel that we are kind of in a golden era? And also let me know how long you have been playing down in the comments below and what point of time in your Pad life was the most exciting. Regardless of all that, hopefully you all have a fantastic day. I wish you all the best luck in your own Pad adventures, and happy puzzling.